That's not what it says. 4 words from a 12-year-old maid's daughter brought down a billionaire's empire in seconds. When Emily Carter exposed Victor Blackwell's $500 million fraud against Japanese tycoon Kenji Tanaka, she didn't just save a fortune, she revealed how her grandfather's wartime honor echoed across 70 years to this penthouse showdown. Friends, this is a story of courage versus corruption, where a child's whispered truth toppled titans. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story of justice travels. The Blackwell Tower pierced Chicago's skyline like a glass dagger, its penthouse office a monument to ruthless ambition. On this October afternoon with autumn sun bleeding gold across Lake Michigan, Victor Blackwell stood at the apex of his empire moments away from sealing the deal that would crown his legacy. $500 million hung in the balance, wrapped in legal language and cultural manipulation so elegant that even he admired his own cunning. "Mr. Tanaka," Victor said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, gesturing toward the conference table where contracts lay spread like battle plans. "Today we unite East and West in unprecedented partnership." Kenji Tanaka, 73 years old, with silver hair that caught the light like brushed steel, nodded with the measured grace of old-world Japanese business culture. Behind him stood 2 aides, their faces masks of professional neutrality. Beside Victor, his son Preston lounged with the lazy confidence of inherited privilege, while Eleanor Blackwell, Victor's wife, sat poised in Chanel, her smile as sharp as her husband's ambitions. And in the corner, invisible as furniture, Grace Carter arranged crystal water glasses with practiced silence. Her uniform was pressed, despite being 3 years old, her hands steady despite the arthritis that had begun its cruel work. Beside her, trying to shrink into the marble wall, stood her daughter Emily, 12 years old, wearing her best dress, which was really her only dress that still fit properly. Grace had brought her today because school was closed for teacher conferences, and leaving Emily alone in their South Side apartment felt more dangerous than bringing her to work. "Just stay quiet and still," Grace had whispered that morning, pressing a book into Emily's hands. "Like we practiced." Emily had nodded, understanding the weight of invisibility. In the Blackwell world, people like them were meant to be shadows, present but unnoticed, essential but unacknowledged. She clutched her grandfather's old Japanese language textbook, its pages yellowed and margins filled with his careful handwriting. Walter Carter had been dead 2 years now, but his lessons lived in Emily's mind as clear as if he still sat beside her at their kitchen table, teaching her kanji with infinite patience. "The interpreter will now read the terms," Victor announced, gesturing to a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus Webb had been on Victor's payroll for 3 years, translating not just language but intent, bending, meaning to serve power. As Webb began reading in Japanese, Emily's attention sharpened involuntarily. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Language is sacred, Em. When you speak someone's tongue, you hold their truth in your mouth. Never betray that trust." The Japanese words flowed from Webb's mouth, and at first they seemed to match the English contract Victor had been explaining. Partnership percentages, profit sharing, mutual growth, all the pleasant lies that dressed up exploitation. But then Webb reached page 7, subsection 4, and Emily's blood turned cold. The English version read, "Both parties agree to shared oversight of combined assets during the initial integration period." But Webb's Japanese translation said something entirely different. "Tanaka Industries hereby transfers full controlling interest of all assets, patents, and subsidiary holdings to Blackwell Global Enterprises, effective upon signature with irrevocable power of attorney granted to Victor Blackwell as sole executor. Emily's hands trembled. She looked at her mother, but Grace was focused on remaining invisible, her eyes downcast. She looked at Mr. Tanaka, whose weathered face showed polite attention, as he listened to what he believed were the terms of a partnership, not a surrender. His aides took notes, unaware they were documenting their company's destruction. "Any questions before we proceed to signatures?" Victor asked, his smile widening. Preston actually chuckled, already calculating how to spend his expanded inheritance. Eleanor's fingers drummed a silent victory march on her Hermes clutch. This was the moment. Emily felt it like a physical weight pressing on her chest. She could stay silent, stay safe, stay invisible. Her mother needed this job. $14 an hour was the difference between keeping their apartment and living in their car. Speaking up meant destruction, swift and certain. But her grandfather's voice wouldn't stop. "Honor isn't about being brave when it's easy, Em. It's about doing right when everything inside you screams to run." Walter Carter had earned a Silver Star in Korea, not for killing, but for pulling 3 wounded Japanese-American soldiers from a burning transport when everyone else had written them off. One of those soldiers had been James Tanaka, whose son now sat at this very table about to lose everything to a con dressed in contracts. "That's not what it says." The words escaped Emily's mouth before she could stop them, barely a whisper, but somehow carrying across the room like a gunshot. Every head turned. Victor's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to cold fury in the span of a heartbeat. Preston sat up straight, his lazy confidence replaced by sharp attention. Eleanor's drumming fingers froze. "What did you say?" Victor's voice had lost its smooth coating, revealing the raw iron underneath. Grace grabbed Emily's arm, her fingers digging in with desperate pressure. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm so sorry, she didn't mean." "That's not what it says," Emily repeated louder this time. Her voice shook, but didn't break. She pointed at the contract with a trembling finger. "The Japanese translation. It's wrong." Preston burst out laughing, the sound harsh and mocking. "The maid's kid thinks she speaks Japanese. This is precious. Dad, you should give your help a raise. They're providing entertainment now." "Silence," Victor commanded, but his eyes never left Emily's face. "You dare interrupt a $500 million negotiation. Your mother's position here ends today." "Victor," Eleanor interjected, her voice dripping false concern. "The child is clearly confused. Perhaps she's been watching too much anime." She turned to Grace with a smile that promised retribution. "You really should monitor what your daughter watches. These cartoons give children such strange ideas." But Kenji Tanaka raised his hand, and the room fell silent with the authority of his gesture. His eyes, which had seemed mild and grandfatherly moments before, now held an edge like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Let the child speak," he said in accented but clear English. Then switching to Japanese, he addressed Emily directly. "Kodomo-san Nihongo ga wakarimasu ka?" "Child, do you understand?" Japanese Emily's response flowed out in perfect Japanese, her accent, bearing traces of an older, more formal style, the way Japanese was spoken in the 1950s, the way Walter had learned it from the soldiers he'd saved. "Hai Tanaka-sama, watashi no oji-san wa watashi ni oshiete kuremashita. Kare wa anata no oto-san, o senso de tasukamashita." "Yes, Mr. Tanaka. My grandfather taught me. He saved your father in the war." The transformation in Tanaka's face was instant and complete. The mild businessman vanished, replaced by something ancient and immovable. "What was your grandfather's name?" "Walter Carter, sir. Staff Sergeant Walter Carter, 2nd Infantry Division." Tanaka stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Tell me what you heard. Emily looked at Victor, whose face had gone pale beneath his tan. Preston had stopped laughing. Eleanor's perfect composure showed its first crack. Marcus Webb, the interpreter, had begun to sweat visibly. The English contract says you'll share control of assets, Emily said, switching back to English so everyone could understand. But Mr. Webb translated it to say you're giving everything to Mr. Blackwell. All of it. Forever. With no way to get it back. You lying little... Preston started forward, but one of Tanaka's aides stepped between them, his movement subtle but unmistakable. Webb, Tanaka said, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of mountains. Read page 7, subsection 4 again, in both languages, slowly. Webb's hands shook as he lifted the contract. His voice cracked on the first word. He read the English version, then began the Japanese. Halfway through, his voice failed entirely. I can't, Webb whispered. You can't. Tanaka's eyebrow raised a fraction. Or you won't. Mr. Blackwell, Webb looked desperately at Victor, who stood frozen, his empire crumbling in real time. Read it correctly, Tanaka commanded. Now. Webb read it correctly this time. The real translation. The theft laid bare in 2 languages. When he finished, the silence in the room was complete, broken only by the distant sound of Chicago traffic 50 floors below. Tanaka-san. Victor began, his voice attempting to reclaim its smoothness. There's been a misunderstanding. Webb clearly made an error. An error, Tanaka repeated. How fortunate that a 12-year-old child was here to catch this error. He turned to Emily. What else did you notice? Emily looked at the contract, then at her mother's terrified face, then at Mr. Tanaka's encouraging nod. Page 12, the subsidiary clause. Page 18, the patent transfers. Page 23, the voting rights. They're all changed, sir. All of them give control to Mr. Blackwell. You're destroying us, Grace whispered to her daughter, tears streaming down her face. Emily, please stop. But Emily couldn't stop. Her grandfather's honor flowed through her like electricity. Page 31 says you're also agreeing to cover any legal liabilities from Blackwell's previous ventures. In the English, it says you're protected from them. Victor moved then fast for a man his size, reaching for Emily. You little... Tanaka's voice cracked like a whip. Touch that child and I will end you. Victor froze his hand inches from Emily's shoulder. In that moment, the mask fell completely, his face contorted with rage so pure it seemed to burn. This is my building, Victor snarled. My city, my deal. You think the word of some welfare brat matters, Webb? Tell them you made honest mistakes. Tell them now. Webb collapsed into a chair, his body folding in on itself. I can't anymore. God help me, I can't. He looked at Tanaka with desperate eyes. He paid me $2 million. My daughter has leukemia. The treatments I needed the money. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So it wasn't an error, Tanaka said. It was fraud. Attempted theft of $500 million and a company I built with my father's hands. Preston tried to salvage something from the wreckage. Mr. Tanaka, surely we can renegotiate. This is all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a child who doesn't understand business. A child who understands honor. Tanaka interrupted. Something you clearly never learned. He turned to his aides and spoke rapid Japanese. They immediately began gathering documents, their movements efficient and final. You walk out that door and you're declaring war, Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. I have connections you can't imagine. I will bury your company in litigation for the next 20 years. Try, Tanaka said simply. Then he walked to Emily and knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. Your grandfather was Walter Carter. Yes, sir. He saved my father's life in 1951. Pulled him from a burning truck when his own unit told him to leave the Japs behind. My father lived another 40 years because of Walter Carter. He built the company that Victor Blackwell just tried to steal. And now Walter Carter's granddaughter has saved that company again. He stood and addressed Grace. Your daughter has more courage than anyone in this room. You should be proud. We're dead, Grace whispered. He'll destroy us. No, Tanaka said firmly. He won't. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Japanese. When he hung up, he turned to Victor. That was my legal team. They're filing emergency injunctions against Blackwell Global in Tokyo, London, and New York. Your stock will lose 40% of its value by market close. Your board will call an emergency meeting within the hour. You might want to attend. Victor's phone began buzzing. Then Preston's. Then Eleanor's. The cascade of disaster had begun. As for you, Tanaka continued, addressing Grace and Emily, you no longer work here. You work for me. Same position, triple the salary, and your daughter's education is now my responsibility. I pay my debts, Mrs. Carter. Your father-in-law gave me a father to grow up with. I can never repay that fully, but I will try. You can't just... Eleanor began, her composure finally cracking completely. I can and I will, Tanaka said, unless you'd prefer I share the recording of this entire meeting with the Securities and Exchange Commission. My aide has been recording since we walked in, standard protocol for all major negotiations. Victor's face went from pale to gray. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. The charges would be endless. Get out, he whispered. All of you, get out. Tanaka's team moved toward the door. Grace, still in shock, stood frozen until Emily took her hand. We should go, Mom. But as they reached the door, Victor called out, his voice raw with hatred. You think you've won something, little girl? You've destroyed your mother's life. No one in Chicago will hire her. No one will rent to you. I'll make sure you end up on the street where you belong. Emily turned back, and for a moment she wasn't 12 years old anymore. She was the inheritor of Walter Carter's legacy, carrying the weight of honor across generations. My grandfather used to say that honor is the only thing a person truly owns, she said. You tried to steal Mr. Tanaka's company, but all you really did was show everyone that you never had any honor to lose. The elevator ride down from the penthouse felt like descending from another world. Grace held Emily tight, her body shaking with delayed terror and disbelief. Tanaka stood with them, having dismissed his aides to handle the legal aftermath. Your grandfather, Tanaka said softly. Tell me about him. Emily's voice was small now, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a tired child. He died 2 years ago. Cancer. But before that, he taught me Japanese every day after school. Said it was important to understand people, not just their words. He had this old textbook from the army, and these notebooks where he wrote down everything he learned from the soldiers he served with. The Nisei soldiers, Tanaka said. The Japanese Americans who fought for a country that had imprisoned their families. He said they were the bravest men he ever knew. Emily continued. He used to tell me stories about your father, how he kept apologizing for bleeding on Grandpa's uniform while Grandpa carried him to the medics, how they wrote letters to each other for 40 years after the war. I have those letters, Tanaka said quietly. Every one my father received. They're in our company museum in Tokyo. He paused. Your grandfather never mentioned he had a granddaughter who spoke Japanese. He was proud but private. Grace spoke for the first time since leaving the penthouse. Said the only reward for doing right was being able to sleep at night. The elevator opened to the lobby where security guards were already buzzing with whispered conversations. News traveled fast in the Blackwell Tower. By the confused and shocked looks they gave Grace, everyone already knew something momentous had happened. Tanaka's limousine waited outside. He insisted on driving them home, wanting to see where they lived. The ride from the Loop to the South Side was a journey through Chicago's stark inequality, from gleaming towers to abandoned lots, from luxury boutiques to corner stores with barred windows. Their apartment building stood like a tired soldier, still upright, but bearing scars from every battle with time and neglect. The elevator had been broken for 6 months. They climbed 5 flights of stairs, Tanaka's expensive shoes echoing in the narrow stairwell. "This is it," Grace said, embarrassed, as she unlocked 3 deadbolts. "It's not much, but—" "It's a home where honor lives," Tanaka interrupted. "That makes it a palace." The apartment was small, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with a dripping faucet. But it was immaculate. Grace had learned that cleanliness cost nothing but effort, and effort she had in abundance. Emily's corner held her grandfather's things, his books, his medals in a small frame, a photo of him in uniform, young and serious. Tanaka studied the photograph for a long moment. "He was so young. 19 when he saved your father," Emily said. "He used to say the war taught him that people were just people no matter where they came from." "Your rent here?" Tanaka asked. $1,200 a month, Grace admitted. "It takes most of my salary. The rest goes to groceries and Emily's school supplies." "No more," Tanaka said. "Tomorrow my assistant will contact you with housing options. You choose what you want. And Emily, you'll need a better school. I know several with excellent language programs." "Mr. Tanaka, we can't," Grace began. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Your husband's father gave my family everything. Without him, there is no Tanaka Industries, no fortune to fight over, no legacy to protect. I've been looking for Walter Carter's family for 20 years, ever since my father died. He made me promise to find them, to repay the debt. I hired investigators, but Walter had moved so many times, and Carter is such a common name." He turned to Emily. "And then you spoke, in that accent, that formal way my father described in his letters. The way Walter Carter learned Japanese from soldiers who'd learned it from their immigrant parents, frozen in time from the 1920s. I knew immediately who you were." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Grandpa would have been so happy to know your father remembered him." "Remembered?" Tanaka laughed, but it was a sound full of tears. "My father named his first factory after him, the Walter Works. It's still our most productive facility." He pulled out his phone, showing them a picture of a modern building with both Japanese and English signage. 3,000 people work there. We make components for medical devices. Saving lives, my father always said, just like Walter saved his. The rest of the afternoon blurred together. Tanaka made calls, setting things in motion. A new apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. A college fund for Emily. A position for Grace in Tanaka Industries' new Chicago office, not as a maid, but as facilities coordinator with a real salary and benefits. "But what about Mr. Blackwell?" Grace asked as evening approached. "He'll come after us." "Let him try," Tanaka said. His phone had been buzzing constantly with updates. Blackwell Global's stock has dropped 47% in 3 hours. The board has called an emergency meeting for tonight. By tomorrow morning, Victor Blackwell will be fighting to stay out of federal prison. He won't have time to think about you. As Tanaka prepared to leave, he knelt once more before Emily. You did a brave thing today. A hard thing. Your grandfather would be proud. I was scared, Emily admitted. Of course you were. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. You honored your grandfather's memory today. You honored my father's memory. And you prevented a great injustice. He stood and bowed formally deeply, the kind of bow reserved for profound respect. Domo arigato gozaimashita, Emily-san. Emily bowed back as her grandfather had taught her. It was my honor, Tanaka-sama. After he left, Grace and Emily sat in their small kitchen sharing a dinner of rice and beans that somehow tasted like a feast. The apartment felt different now, not changed physically, but transformed in meaning. It was no longer a trap, but a launching pad. Are you angry with me? Emily asked quietly. Grace pulled her daughter close. Angry baby. I'm in awe. I've cleaned that man's office for 5 years, listening to him destroy people over speakerphone, watching him crush anyone who opposed him. I was so scared of him, I could barely breathe in his presence. And you, my 12-year-old daughter, you stood up to him. You spoke truth to power. Grandpa would have done the same. Yes, Grace agreed. He would have. And he did in his way. He spent his whole life standing up for what was right, even when it cost him promotions, jobs, friendships. He died with nothing but his honor intact. She smiled through her tears. Except he didn't die with nothing. He had you. And through you, his honor saved us. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she could almost feel her grandfather's presence. She remembered their last conversation 2 days before the cancer finally won. He'd been so thin, his voice barely a whisper, but his eyes had remained bright with purpose. Em, he'd said, struggling with each word. I don't have money to leave you. Don't have much of anything. But I taught you something worth more than money. I taught you to stand. When everyone else kneels to power, you stand. When everyone else stays silent, you speak. Promise me. I promise, Grandpa. And the Japanese, keep learning. Language is bridge. Build bridges, Em. Always bridges, never walls. She'd kept that promise today. In a penthouse office where truth had been for sale, she'd remembered that some things weren't for sale at any price. Her phone, a battered hand-me-down that barely held a charge, buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the text was in Japanese. Your grandfather saved my father. Today you saved my father's dream. Our families are bound by honor across generations. This is not goodbye, but a beginning. Kenji Tanaka. Emily typed back in Japanese. Honor is not inherited. It is chosen. Today I chose. Tomorrow I will choose again. She could almost hear her grandfather's approving chuckle. Meanwhile, 50 floors above Chicago's glittering lights, Victor Blackwell stood in his penthouse office watching his empire crumble in real time on multiple screens. Stock prices plummeting. Board members calling for his resignation. The SEC announcing an investigation. His phone rang constantly. Lawyers, investors, journalists, all smelling blood in the water. Preston had locked himself in his office, probably destroying evidence. Eleanor had disappeared to her sister's house in Wilmette, her departure marked by the slam of a door and the screech of tires. Webb had been arrested at his home, the FBI taking him in for questioning about what else he'd falsified over the years. Victor had built his fortune on the principle that everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought, manipulated, or crushed. He'd never imagined his empire could be toppled by someone who couldn't be bought, because she'd been raised to believe that honor had no price. Sir, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. The board is here. They're in the conference room. Victor straightened his tie, put on his mask of confidence, and walked toward what he knew would be his professional execution. As he passed the spot where Emily had stood, he noticed something on the floor, a hair tie, simple and worn, probably fallen from the girl's pocket. He stared at it for a long moment, this tiny thing that had been in the room when his world ended. Then he crushed it under his heel and walked on, not understanding that you could crush objects, but not truth, that you could silence voices, but not honor. In the conference room, 12 faces turned toward him, faces that had once shown deference, now displaying disgust and calculation. The chairman, Harold Morrison, spoke without preamble. "Victor, we've been reviewing the Tanaka situation. The recording is damning. Our legal exposure is catastrophic. The board has lost confidence in your leadership." "One deal goes bad and you turn on me," Victor snarled. "I built this company. I am this company." "You were this company," Morrison corrected. "As of this moment, you're suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you out." "You can't." "We can and we are. Your key cards have been deactivated. Your accounts are frozen pending audit." "And Victor," Morrison's voice held a satisfaction he didn't try to hide. "That little girl, the maid's daughter, the board, has voted to offer her a formal apology and a scholarship to any university she chooses when the time comes. It's the least we can do to salvage our reputation." The irony was exquisite. The child he'd tried to crush would be educated on his former company's dime. As security arrived, the same guards who'd bowed to him that morning, Victor had one last thought. In all his calculations, he'd never factored in a 12-year-old girl who'd learned honor at her grandfather's knee. It was, he realized too late, a fatal oversight. Grace and Emily Carter stood at Walter's grave on a Sunday morning, the cemetery quiet, except for birdsong. The headstone was simple, Walter had insisted on that, but Grace had brought fresh flowers, and Emily had brought something else. "Hi, Grandpa," Emily said, kneeling on the grass. "I have something to tell you." She pulled out a letter printed on expensive stationery, the Tanaka Industries logo embossed at the top. She read it aloud, her voice carrying across the peaceful grounds. "Dear Ms. Emily Carter, it is with great honor that Tanaka Industries announces the establishment of the Walter Carter Foundation for Ethical Business Practices. This foundation will provide scholarships and support to young people who demonstrate exceptional integrity and courage in the face of adversity. As the inspiration for this foundation and the granddaughter of the man whose heroism made our company possible, you are hereby named the foundation's first recipient and youth ambassador. Your grandfather's legacy of honor lives on through you. With deepest respect, Kenji Tanaka." Emily placed the letter against the headstone, weighing it down with a small stone. "We did it, Grandpa. We stood." The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, Emily could swear she heard her grandfather's voice one last time. "I knew you would, Em. I always knew you would." Grace took her daughter's hand as they walked back through the cemetery toward their new life. Behind them, the letter fluttered in the breeze, its words of honor and recognition, a testament to the power of truth spoken at the right moment by the right person, no matter how young or seemingly powerless they might be. The city stretched out before them, full of possibilities that hadn't existed a week ago. Emily thought about the Japanese phrase her grandfather had taught her, "Nana korobi ya oki," fall down 7 times, stand up 8. They had stood up, and they would keep standing, carrying Walter Carter's honor forward into whatever came next. In the distance, the Blackwell Tower still pierced the skyline, but it looked different now, less like a monument to power, and more like a reminder that all empires built on lies eventually fall. And sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment of truth to start the collapse. Emily squeezed her mother's hand as they walked toward their future, leaving footprints in the grass that would fade by tomorrow, but carrying a legacy that would last generations. Her grandfather had taught her that honor was the only thing a person truly owned. Today, she was rich beyond measure. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces, and somewhere in the city, in a boardroom that had once been Victor Blackwell's throne room, papers were being signed that would fund educations and change lives. The Walter Carter Foundation's first scholarship would go to a girl from the South Side who'd had the courage to say 4 words, "That's not what it says." But there would be others, many others. Young people who would learn that standing up to power wasn't just possible but necessary, that truth spoken with courage could topple titans, and that honor once earned could never be stolen, only given away. And Emily Carter would never give hers away. Not for any price. Not for any threat. Not for any promise. Her grandfather had taught her well. The week following the confrontation transformed Chicago's financial landscape like an earthquake reshaping terrain. Victor Blackwell's name, once spoken with fear and reverence in the city's elite circles, now carried the stench of scandal. Federal investigators swarmed the Blackwell Tower like antibodies attacking an infection, carrying out boxes of documents, while news crews filmed from the street below. Emily tried to return to normal life, but normal had ceased to exist. At her public school on the South Side, whispers followed her through hallways like persistent shadows. Some kids called her a hero, others said she was a snitch who'd destroyed a great man. She ate lunch alone, reading her grandfather's Japanese textbooks, finding comfort in the careful strokes of kanji that connected her to something larger than 7th-grade drama. "You're that girl," Marcus Thompson said one Tuesday afternoon, cornering her by her locker. Marcus was 15, held back twice, and ruled the school through size and aggression. The one who got that rich white man fired. "I didn't get anyone fired," Emily replied quietly, trying to edge past him. "I just told the truth." "Truth?" Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "My uncle worked security at Blackwell Tower. Good job, good pay. Now he's unemployed because the whole company's falling apart. Because of you and your truth." The accusations stung more than Emily wanted to admit. She hadn't thought about the security guards, the janitors, the administrative assistants, all the people like her mother who'd depended on Blackwell Global for survival. In exposing Victor's corruption, had she condemned innocence? That evening, she asked her mother about it, as they packed boxes in their small apartment. Tanaka had arranged for them to move by week's end, but every item they wrapped felt like a decision about what past to carry forward. "Mom, did I hurt people?" The other workers at Blackwell. Grace set down the plate she'd been wrapping, her expression thoughtful. "Baby, when a building is rotten in its foundation, it's going to fall eventually. You didn't cause the rot, you just revealed it. Yes, some good people will suffer in the short term, but how many more would have suffered if Victor had succeeded? How many other companies would he have stolen? How many more families would he have destroyed?" Before Emily could respond, their doorbell rang, unusual since the building's intercom had been broken for years. Grace peered through the peephole and gasped. "It's Mr. Tanaka." They opened the door to find the elderly businessman standing in their dimly lit hallway, looking as out of place as a swan in a junkyard. But his expression held no discomfort, only purpose. "Forgive the unexpected visit," he said, bowing slightly. "There's something urgent we need to discuss. May I come in?" They settled around their small kitchen table, Tanaka accepting instant coffee in a chipped mug, with the same grace he'd probably shown at state dinners. His face was grave as he pulled out a tablet showing them a news article. "Preston Blackwell has given an interview," he said, "to the Wall Street Journal. He's claiming you were planted by me, that this whole situation was corporate espionage, that Emily had been trained specifically to sabotage the deal." Emily's stomach dropped. But that's a lie. I'd never even heard of you before that day. I know, Tanaka said calmly. But lies don't need to be true to cause damage. They just need to be believed. And the Blackwells still have many friends in media. He showed them another screen social media posts calling Emily a corporate spy child and Grace an industrial espionage operative. They're trying to flip the narrative, Grace said, her voice tight with anger. Make themselves the victims. Precisely, which is why we need to respond. Emily, I know you've avoided the media, but would you consider telling your story publicly, not for sensation, but for truth? Emily thought of her grandfather, who'd hated attention so much, he'd refused even small recognition for his war heroics. But he'd also taught her that sometimes silence was complicity. What would I have to do? There's a journalist, Catherine Chen, from the Tribune. She's thorough, fair, and most importantly, she verifies everything. No sensationalism, just facts. She'd like to interview you with your mother present, of course. Grace squeezed Emily's hand. It's your choice, baby. Emily nodded slowly. Okay. But I want to show her Grandpa's letters, the ones where he wrote about saving Mr. Tanaka's father, so people know this isn't some conspiracy. It's just honor. The interview took place 2 days later in Tanaka's hotel suite neutral ground that didn't make Emily feel exposed. Catherine Chen turned out to be a small woman with kind eyes and a recorder that she set on the table between them like a bridge to truth. Let's start at the beginning, Chen said gently. Tell me about your grandfather. Emily's voice started weak but grew stronger as she spoke about Walter Carter, not the war hero, but the man who'd worked 3 jobs to keep their family afloat, who'd spent his evenings teaching her Japanese, even when his throat was raw from cancer treatments, who'd pressed his silver star into her hand before he died and said, "This isn't what matters. What matters is what you do when no one's watching." She showed Chen the notebooks. Walter's careful practice of Japanese characters, his notes from conversations with the soldiers, he'd saved the letters from James Tanaka that spanned decades. One letter dated just months before James's death stood out. Walter, my friend, you gave me 40 extra years of life, 40 years to build something, to love my wife, to raise my son. Every building we construct, every life our medical devices save exists because you saw me as a man worth saving when others saw only an enemy. I have tried to live those 40 years with honor to be worthy of your sacrifice. My son Kenji knows your name as well as his own. If fate ever allows our families to meet again, the debt will be remembered. Chen's eyes glistened as she read. And you never knew about this connection until that day in the penthouse. Never, Grace interjected. We were just trying to survive. I took the cleaning job at Blackwell because it had health insurance. Emily learned Japanese because it was her connection to her grandfather. We had no idea Mr. Tanaka even existed. Then came the day of the meeting, Chen prompted. Emily described it all, the fear, the moment of recognition, the decision to speak. She didn't dramatize or embellish. The truth needed no decoration. Preston Blackwell says you were coached, Chen said carefully. That you knew exactly what to say to destroy the deal. I was coached, Emily said, surprising everyone. By my grandfather, every day for 10 years. 10 sonsa. He coached me to recognize when someone was being hurt, to speak up for people who couldn't speak for themselves, to choose honor even when it cost everything. She met Chen's eyes directly. If that's conspiracy, then yes, I'm guilty. Chen turned to Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka, you've been silent through all of this. Why speak now? Because they're attacking a child, Tanaka said, his calm voice carrying steel underneath. A brave young woman who prevented a crime. Victor Blackwell attempted to steal $500 million and my life's work. When he was caught, instead of accepting responsibility, he sends his son to attack the very person who exposed him. This is not just about business anymore. It's about what kind of society we want to be. The Blackwells claim you're exploiting the situation, Chen noted. That you're using Emily as a shield while you destroy their company. Tanaka's expression hardened. I'm not destroying anything. Victor Blackwell built his empire on fraud, and now it collapses under its own weight. As for Emily being a shield, he pulled out his phone showing Chen a document. This is the scholarship fund we've established in Walter Carter's name. Not Emily's name, her grandfather's. Because this isn't about exploitation. It's about honor passing through generations. The interview continued for 2 hours. Chen asked hard questions, challenged their answers, verified every claim. When she finally turned off her recorder, she sat back with a deep sigh. In 20 years of journalism, I've covered countless corporate scandals. But I've never seen anything like this. A 12-year-old girl bringing down a billionaire not through scheming, but through simple honesty. She looked at Emily. You know Preston won't stop. The Blackwells have resources connections. They'll keep coming after you. Maybe, Emily said. But Grandpa used to say that lies are like buildings without foundations. They might stand for a while, but eventually they fall. Truth just has to outlast them. The article ran 3 days later, covering the entire front page of the Tribune's business section. Chen had done her research thoroughly, interviewing dozens of former Blackwell employees who came forward with their own stories of Victor's corruption. The translator, Marcus Webb, had given a statement from federal custody confirming every detail of Emily's account. But it was the photograph Chen chose for the article that struck deepest, not Emily or Tanaka, or even Victor, but Walter Carter in his army uniform, young and serious, standing next to James Tanaka and 2 other Japanese-American soldiers he'd saved. The headline read, Honors Echo How a War Hero's Legacy Exposed a Modern Fraud. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country, many from veterans who'd served in Korea, all expressing support for Walter's granddaughter. A group of Japanese-American veterans from the 442nd Regiment, the most decorated unit in U.S. military history, issued a statement praising Emily's courage and connecting it to their own motto, Go for Broke. But the Blackwells didn't surrender. Preston appeared on cable news, his handsome face arranged in an expression of wounded nobility. We're being destroyed by foreign interests and their child operative, he insisted to a sympathetic host. My family built American jobs, American infrastructure. Now we're being torn down by people who don't share our values. The dog whistle was clear. Within hours, Emily's school received threatening calls. Someone spray-painted traitor on their apartment building. Grace found her car tires slashed. Maybe we should leave Chicago, Grace said one night, double-checking the locks for the 3rd time. Mr. Tanaka offered us positions in Tokyo. We could start fresh. Emily stood at their window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Preston Blackwell was probably in his Lakeshore Drive penthouse plotting his next attack. Victor was likely with his lawyers building his defense. Eleanor had filed for divorce and disappeared to Europe. The empire was crumbling, but empires rarely died quietly. Grandpa never ran, Emily said finally. Even when it would have been easier. Even when it cost him. Grandpa also didn't have people threatening him, Grace pointed out. No, he just had actual bullets shot at him in an actual war. Emily turned from the window. If we run now, they win. They get to write the story. Brave whistleblower becomes scared little girl who couldn't handle the consequences. Grace pulled her daughter close. When did you become so strong? I'm not strong, Emily admitted. I'm terrified. but being scared and running away are two different things. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Harold Morrison, the chairman who'd ousted Victor, called Tanaka personally. The conversation which Tanaka shared with the Carters offered a glimpse into the civil war within Blackwell Global. "The board is splitting," Morrison had said. "Half want to salvage what's left by distancing from Victor completely. The other half still believe he can fight his way back. Preston is rallying the old guard, promising them that if they stand by the family, they'll be rewarded when Victor beats the charges." "He won't beat the charges," Tanaka had replied. "The evidence is overwhelming. You don't know Victor like I do. He's got judges in his pocket, politicians who owe him favors. He might not walk free, but he might walk away with a slap on the wrist. And then he'll come for blood." The warning proved prophetic. Within a week, Victor's legal team had filed countersuits against Tanaka Industries, claiming corporate espionage, defamation, and tortious interference. They subpoenaed Emily for a deposition, attempting to force a 12-year-old to testify under oath. "This is intimidation," Tanaka's lawyer David Kim explained as they sat in his office preparing for the deposition. "They want to scare Emily into recanting or contradicting herself. One wrong word and they'll use it to discredit everything." "So what do I do?" Emily asked, her hands trembling slightly. "Tell the truth," Kim said simply. "That's all. Don't elaborate, don't speculate, don't guess. If you don't know something, say you don't know. If you don't remember, say you don't remember. The truth is your shield." The deposition took place in a glass tower that seemed designed to intimidate all sharp angles and cold surfaces. Victor's legal team consisted of 5 lawyers led by Robert Sterling, a man known for reducing witnesses to tears. They sat Emily at the end of a long table, a camera recording every word, a court reporter typing every sound. Sterling began with false kindness, his voice grandfatherly. "Emily, you understand you're under oath that lying here is a crime." "Yes, sir." "Good. Now let's talk about your grandfather. He taught you Japanese?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since I was 2. "That's quite young. How can you be sure you were 2? Emily pulled out a photograph, her sitting on Walter's lap, a Japanese children's book between them. On the back, in Walter's handwriting, Emily's first Japanese lesson, age 2. Sterling's kindness evaporated. "How convenient that you have such documentation. Almost like you were preparing for this moment." "My grandfather documented everything," Emily replied steadily. "He said memory fades, but writing remains." "Did he also teach you to eavesdrop on private business conversations?" "Objection," David Kim interjected. "Argumentative." "I'll rephrase," Sterling said smoothly. "Were you specifically listening to the contract reading? It was being read aloud in the room where I was standing. I couldn't not hear it." "But you could have chosen not to speak." "Yes." "So why did you?" Emily thought carefully. "Because Mr. Webb was lying about what the contract said. Mr. Tanaka was about to sign away his company without knowing it." "How did you know Mr. Webb was lying?" "Perhaps he was simply mistaken." "He wasn't mistaken. He changed specific words that completely altered the meaning. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Sterling pressed harder, trying to trap her in contradictions, but Emily held to the truth like a lifeline. When he asked about her family's financial situation, implying they were desperate enough to participate in a scheme, she answered simply, "We were poor, we're still poor, but poor doesn't mean dishonest." "Your mother's job was terminated that day, correct?" "Yes." "And immediately Mr. Tanaka offered her employment?" "Yes." "Quite convenient." Emily met his stare. "What's convenient about losing a job you've had for 5 years because you told the truth?" The deposition lasted 6 hours. Sterling tried every tactical approach: intimidation, confusion, exhaustion. But Emily had been raised by a man who'd faced actual enemies in actual combat. She didn't break. Finally, Sterling played what he thought was his trump card. "Emily, are you aware that your grandfather had a criminal record?" The room went silent. Even David Kim looked surprised. Emily's voice remained steady. "Yes." "Would you tell us about it?" "He was arrested in 1967 for participating in a civil rights march. He was protesting housing discrimination against black veterans. He spent 3 days in jail and was proud of it." Sterling had clearly expected something different. He shuffled his papers, regrouping. "That's not the only arrest." "No. He was also arrested in 1975 for blocking the entrance to a factory that was dumping chemicals in a neighborhood where kids were getting sick. The charges were dropped when the EPA confirmed the dumping." "So your grandfather had a pattern of interfering in matters that weren't his concern." Emily's composure finally cracked, but not in the way Sterling expected. Her voice rose with passion, not fear. "My grandfather had a pattern of standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Just like he stood up for Mr. Tanaka's father when other soldiers wanted to leave him behind. Just like I stood up when I heard Mr. Webb lying. If that's interference, then yes, we interfere. We interfere with injustice." David Kim had to suppress a smile. Sterling had just given them a gift on camera. On record, he'd allowed Emily to frame the entire situation in terms of civil rights and moral courage. The deposition ended with Sterling's frustration evident. As they gathered their things, he made one last attempt at intimidation, speaking low enough that the court reporter couldn't hear. "This isn't over, little girl. The Blackwells don't forget." But Emily heard something else in his voice: fear. For all his legal maneuvering, he knew the truth was against him. Outside the building, Tanaka waited with Grace. They'd wanted to be in the room, but Kim had advised against it. Better to let Emily stand on her own strength. As she emerged exhausted but unbroken, Tanaka bowed deeply. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply. "I just told the truth," Emily replied. "In a world of lies, that's the most radical act possible." The ride home was quiet, Emily sleeping against her mother's shoulder in the back of Tanaka's car. Grace stroked her daughter's hair, marveling at the strength housed in such a small frame. "She's remarkable," Tanaka said softly from the front seat. "She's Walter's granddaughter," Grace replied. "He always said courage was hereditary, but you had to choose to inherit it." As they pulled up to their building, they found Catherine Chen waiting, her expression urgent. "You need to see this, Wu," she said, showing them her phone. "Preston Blackwell just held a press conference. He's announced he's running for alderman, positioning himself as a victim of foreign interference, fighting back for American values." The video showed Preston at a podium, American flags behind him, his voice passionate with manufactured conviction. "They want to silence us because we represent American success. They use our own laws against us, our own kindness. But Chicago won't be fooled. We know who built this city, and we know who's trying to tear it down." "He's turning this political," Chen explained. "If he wins, he'll have a platform to rehabilitate the family name and actual power to make your lives difficult." Emily, now awake, watched Preston's performance with tired eyes. "He's scared," she said quietly. "What makes you say that?" Chen asked. "The same reason animals bare their teeth. They only attack when they feel cornered." That night, as they sat in their small apartment, eating takeout Chinese food that Tanaka had insisted on buying, Emily made a decision. "I want to learn more," she announced. "More Japanese?" Grace asked. "More everything, business, law, politics. If people like Preston Blackwell are going to keep attacking, I need to understand their weapons. Tanaka set down his chopsticks. I could arrange tutors, the best. No, Emily said firmly. No special treatment. I'll earn it. Libraries are free. The internet exists. I just need time and determination. You're 12, Grace reminded her gently. You should be thinking about school dances and friends, not corporate warfare. I can't afford to be 12, Emily replied, and the sadness in her voice made both adults wince. The moment I spoke up in that penthouse, I stopped being just a kid. That's the price of truth-telling in a world built on lies. Over the next weeks, Emily transformed their corner of the apartment into a study center. Library books stacked high, business ethics, corporate law, Chicago political history. She read voraciously, taking notes in the same careful style her grandfather had used. When she didn't understand something, she researched until she did. The dedication worried Grace but impressed Tanaka, who began sending books of his own Japanese business philosophy texts on ethical leadership biographies of leaders who'd chosen principle over profit. You're building a warrior, he told Grace one evening, as Emily studied nearby, absorbed in a book about contract law. I never wanted her to be a warrior, Grace replied sadly. I wanted her to be a child. The world rarely asks what we want, but perhaps she can be both a warrior when needed, a child when possible. As autumn settled over Chicago, the battle lines solidified. Preston's alderman campaign gained momentum, funded by old Blackwell allies who saw opportunity in chaos. Victor's trial was set for spring, his lawyers filing motion after motion to delay and complicate. The media coverage had shifted from sensation to analysis, with economists debating the long-term implications of the Blackwell collapse. But in their small apartment, life found a rhythm. Emily attended school where she was no longer alone. Several classmates, inspired by her courage, had become friends and allies. Grace worked at her new position with Tanaka Industries, finally earning enough to save rather than just survive. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Emily stood at their window again, but this time her posture was different, not defiant, but determined. What are you thinking? Grace asked, joining her. That Preston's right about one thing. This city was built by people like the Blackwells, but maybe it's time it was rebuilt by people like us. That's a big dream for a 12-year-old. Emily smiled, the first real smile her mother had seen since the penthouse confrontation. Grandpa used to say, dreams are just plans you haven't started yet. Outside, Chicago glittered under fresh snow, cleansing and cold. The Blackwell Tower still stood, but its lights seemed dimmer now, its presence less imposing. Change was coming slow but inexorable, like water wearing away stone. And at its heart, a 12-year-old girl who'd learned that truth was stronger than power, that honor could echo across generations, and that sometimes the smallest voice could speak the loudest when it spoke for justice. The winter months brought a deceptive calm to Chicago's snow, blanketing the city's sharp edges in pristine white. But beneath the surface, the battle intensified. Preston Blackwell's alderman campaign gained traction among those who saw the family's downfall as an attack on traditional power structures. His rallies drew crowds of disaffected workers from collapsed Blackwell subsidiaries, people whose anger he skillfully redirected from his father's corruption to the foreign interference that had exposed it. Emily watched one such rally on her phone during lunch break, hunched in the school library, while snow fell outside the windows. Preston stood before a crowd in a union hall, his sleeves rolled up in calculated casualness, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of inherited charisma. They want you to believe a 12-year-old girl spontaneously understood complex international contracts, Preston said, earning bitter laughter from the crowd. They want you to believe my family, who employed thousands of Chicagoans for decades, are the villains. But ask yourselves who benefits from Blackwell Global's destruction, not you, not American workers. Only foreign competitors who couldn't beat us fairly. He's good, said a voice behind Emily. She turned to find Marcus Thompson, the boy who'd confronted her weeks earlier about his uncle's lost job. His expression was unreadable. He's lying, Emily replied quietly. Maybe, but lies that make people feel better about their problems are powerful. Marcus sat down across from her, his massive frame making the library chair creak. My uncle got a new job, by the way, with Tanaka Industries. Better pay actual benefits. He wanted me to thank you. Emily's surprise must have shown because Marcus almost smiled. Yeah, I know. Plot twist. Turns out Mr. Tanaka hired every single Blackwell employee who lost their job because of the collapse, except the executives who knew about the fraud. My uncle says it's the best thing that ever happened to him. I didn't know that, Emily admitted. She made a mental note to thank Mr. Tanaka, though she suspected he wouldn't want gratitude for what he'd consider basic decency. Preston Blackwell doesn't mention that in his speeches, Marcus continued. Doesn't fit his story about foreign invaders destroying American jobs. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. There's going to be trouble at his next rally. Some guys from the neighborhood, they're planning to show up and start something. Thought you should know. Before Emily could respond, Marcus was gone, leaving her with a new weight of knowledge. That evening, she told her mother and Tanaka about the warning. We should inform the police, Grace said immediately. And say what? Tanaka asked gently. That we heard a rumor about potential violence, they'll do nothing, or worse, they'll assume we're the ones planning it. So we do nothing. Grace's frustration was evident. No, Emily said slowly, an idea forming. We do something better. We take away his audience. She explained her plan with the strategic thinking she'd been developing through her studies. The same night as Preston's next rally, they would hold their own event, not a political rally, but a job fair hosted by Tanaka Industries and the other companies that had hired former Blackwell employees. Give people hope instead of anger, opportunities instead of enemies. Tanaka's eyes lit up. Brilliant. We don't fight his narrative directly, we make it irrelevant. The job fair came together with remarkable speed. Tanaka's network responded immediately, and Catherine Chen helped publicize it through the Tribune. They booked the same union hall Preston had used, but for the night before his scheduled rally. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The morning of the job fair, Emily woke to find their apartment building surrounded by news vans. Someone she suspected Preston's campaign had leaked that she would be attending. The media smelled drama. You don't have to go, Ma, Grace said, watching her daughter stare out at the circus below. Mr. Tanaka can handle it. No, Emily said, squaring her shoulders in a gesture eerily reminiscent of Walter preparing for battle. They want me to hide. Hiding makes me look guilty or scared. You're 12. You're allowed to be scared. I am scared. But Grandpa went to war at 18. I can go to a job fair at 12. They arrived to find the Union Hall packed beyond capacity. Former Blackwell employees mixed with other job seekers, the atmosphere charged with desperate hope. Several companies had set up booths, and Tanaka had arranged for food trucks to provide free meals. It felt less like a corporate event, and more like a community gathering. Emily tried to blend into the background, but within minutes someone recognized her. That's the girl, she heard whispered. The one who exposed Blackwell. She expected hostility, but instead, a woman approached with tears in her eyes. You saved my pension, the woman said, gripping Emily's hands. I worked in Blackwell's accounting for 20 years. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to speak up. When the FBI investigated after you exposed the fraud, they found management had been looting our pension fund. We got it back because of you." Soon Emily was surrounded by similar stories. Workers who'd suspected corruption but felt powerless. Middle managers who'd been forced to falsify reports. Security guards who'd seen things they couldn't report. Her single act of truth-telling had given them all permission to speak. "This is what Preston doesn't understand," Tanaka said quietly, standing beside her. "He thinks this is about nationality or loyalty to companies, but it's about something much simpler. People want to work for someone they can respect." The evening proceeded smoothly until Preston himself appeared, flanked by cameras and supporters. He'd clearly come to create a confrontation to generate footage for his campaign. The crowd parted as he approached Emily, his handsome face set in an expression of righteous anger. "You have some nerve," he said loud enough for every camera to hear, "using these people's desperation to polish your image." Emily felt every eye in the room on her. This was the moment Preston wanted: the child cowering before the adult, the guilty shrinking from the accused. But she thought of her grandfather facing down enemies in Korea, of his quiet courage in 1,000 small battles afterward. "I'm not using anyone," she replied, her voice steady. "These companies are offering real jobs to people who lost them. What are you offering besides anger?" "I'm offering them dignity," Preston shot back. "The dignity of knowing they weren't betrayed by their employer, but by foreign manipulation." "Your father tried to steal $500 million, Emily said simply. "That's not foreign manipulation. That's American greed." Preston's face flushed. "My father built this city's economy." "Your father built a house of cards," Emily interrupted, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "And when it fell, these people suffered. Now they're being offered real foundations with honest companies. Why does that threaten you?" The crowd had formed a circle around them, cameras recording every word. Preston realized he was losing control of the narrative. His next words came out sharp, desperate. "You're just a child playing games you don't understand. When the adults take back control—" "The adults had control," Emily said. "That's how we got here. Maybe it's time to try something else. Maybe it's time for truth." Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another. Soon the applause was thunderous. Preston stood isolated in its center, his planned confrontation transformed into public defeat. He left without another word, his cameras trailing behind him like a retreating army. That night's news led with the confrontation. Political commentators called it a defining moment in Preston's campaign, the image of him trying to intimidate a 12-year-old girl playing poorly with voters. His poll numbers, which had been rising on grievance and nostalgia, began their steady decline. But Victor Blackwell wasn't finished. From his penthouse prison of house arrest, the judge had granted bail with conditions he orchestrated a more vicious counterattack. 3 days after the job fair, Grace arrived at work to find her desk covered in printed emails, personal messages she'd sent from her home computer, somehow stolen and exposed. Nothing in them was scandalous, but they were private. Messages about Emily's struggles at school, worries about money, medical concerns about lingering effects from an old injury. The violation felt like assault. "How?" Grace asked Tanaka, shaking with rage and humiliation. David Kim, who'd been called immediately, had an answer. "They hired hackers, cyber mercenaries who specialize in destroying reputations. This is just the beginning. They're looking for anything to embarrass or discredit you." "But we haven't done anything wrong," Grace protested. "That doesn't matter. They'll take innocent things out of context. A joke becomes a threat. A complaint becomes disloyalty. They'll construct a narrative from fragments. Emily listened from the doorway, having been called from school when her mother became too upset to work. She thought of all the emails she'd sent, all the texts, all the digital footprints that could be twisted into weapons. "So we're supposed to just take it?" she asked. "No," Tanaka said firmly. "We fight back, but legally, ethically. David, I want our best cybersecurity team protecting the Carters immediately, and I want to know who's behind this, specifically which firm the Blackwells hired." The cybersecurity team discovered the breach within hours. The Blackwells had hired a firm called Digital Shadows, known for skirting legal boundaries. But in their eagerness to attack Grace and Emily, they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd also attempted to hack Tanaka Industries' servers, not realizing the company employed former Israeli military cyber defense specialists. "We have them," the lead specialist, a woman named Sarah, reported. "Complete digital trail. They tried to hide behind proxies, but they got sloppy. This is criminal hacking, federal offense level." "Give it to the FBI," Tanaka ordered. "Everything." The FBI raid on Digital Shadows made national news. The firm's client list, exposed in the investigation, read like a who's who of corporate criminals. Victor Blackwell's name featured prominently, adding cybercrime to his growing list of charges. But the damage to Grace was done. The violation of privacy had shaken her deeply. She barely slept, jumping at every notification, wondering what else might be exposed. Emily watched her mother deteriorate and felt rage building in her chest, not the hot anger of a child, but the cold fury of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. She found herself at her grandfather's grave on a gray February afternoon, needing his guidance more than ever. "They're hurting Mom," she told the headstone, "and I don't know how to protect her. You always protected us, but you're gone, and I'm just a kid, and everything's falling apart." The wind whistled through the cemetery trees, and Emily could almost hear Walter's voice. Protecting people isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about enduring. Sometimes it's about showing them they're not alone. That evening, Emily made a decision. She called Catherine Chen. "I want to do another interview," she said. "But this time I want to talk about my mom." And the interview appeared in the Tribune's Sunday edition with the headline, "The Cost of Truth." But it wasn't about corporate fraud or legal battles. It was about Grace Carter, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs while caring for her dying father-in-law, who'd taught herself to read Japanese so she could help her daughter with homework, who'd scrubbed floors with dignity while executives stepped over her like furniture. Emily spoke about watching her mother come home exhausted, feet swollen, hands raw from cleaning chemicals, but still finding energy to help with homework. About Grace saving coins in a jar for 2 years to buy Emily a proper winter coat. About the quiet heroism of keeping a family together on minimum wage while the people whose offices she cleaned spent more on lunch than she earned in a week. "People talk about my courage in speaking up," Emily said in the interview. "But I learned courage from watching my mom get up every morning and face a world that told her she didn't matter, and choosing to matter anyway." The article went viral, not because of scandal or conflict, but because it reminded people that behind every headline were human beings trying to survive with dignity. Letters poured in supporting Grace, many from other single mothers, other cleaning staff, other invisible workers who saw themselves in her story. The Blackwells' response was swift and cruel. Preston held another press conference, this time with his mother Eleanor, who'd returned from Europe specifically for the event. She wore widow's black, despite Victor being very much alive, her face a mask of martyred suffering. "We're being destroyed by sob stories," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain. "While my husband faces false charges orchestrated by foreign interests, the media celebrates a cleaning woman and her daughter as heroes. This isn't justice, it's jealousy. It's the resentment of the unsuccessful toward those who've achieved greatness. But Eleanor had miscalculated. Her words meant to rally their base instead revealed the ugly core of Blackwell entitlement. The phrase, "just a cleaning woman," became a rallying cry for working-class Chicago. Labor unions condemned her. Religious leaders sermonized about the dignity of all work. Even some of Victor's former allies distanced themselves from such naked elitism. Preston tried to control the damage, claiming his mother had been misunderstood, but the narrative had shifted definitively. The Blackwells were no longer victims, but villains, and not sophisticated villains, but petty ones lashing out at a child and her mother because they'd dared to tell the truth. As March arrived with its false spring warmth, the date for Victor's trial approached. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, but everyone knew Victor had resources and connections. Justice wasn't guaranteed, only possible. Emily threw herself into her studies, preparing for a different kind of battle. She'd started attending a better school courtesy of Tanaka's scholarship fund, where she was no longer the maid's daughter, but the girl who'd stood up to power. Some students resented her fame, others admired it, but she focused on learning debate logic, rhetoric, the tools of argument and persuasion. "Why law?" her debate teacher, Mr. Harrison, asked, after she'd devastated an opponent in a practice round about corporate accountability. "Because lawyers wrote the contracts that almost let Victor Blackwell steal everything," Emily replied. "And lawyers stopped him. Words matter. Knowing how to use them, how to read them, how to fight with them, that matters." One evening, as Emily was deep in a book about contract law, their doorbell rang. Grace answered it to find Marcus Webb, the translator, who'd falsified the contracts, standing in their hallway. He looked gaunt, aged years, in months his expensive suit replaced by a cheap windbreaker. "I need to talk to Emily," he said. Grace almost slammed the door in his face, but Emily appeared behind her. "It's okay, Mom. Let him in." Webb sat at their kitchen table, the same one where Walter had taught Emily Japanese and struggled to find words. "I'm going to prison," he finally said. "Plea deal. 2 years minimum security. I'm losing everything, my house, my reputation, my family won't speak to me." He looked at Emily with haunted eyes. "I wanted to ask you something before I go." "Ask," Emily said simply. "How did you do it? How did you risk everything for strangers when I couldn't even do the right thing for myself?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "I didn't think about it as risking everything. I thought about it as keeping something. My grandfather taught me that honor isn't something you have, it's something you do. Every choice is a chance to do honor or lose it. You chose to lose it for money. I chose to keep it despite money." Webb's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I destroyed my life for $2 million I'll never see. My daughter, the one with leukemia, she won't speak to me. Says she'd rather be sick with an honest father than healthy with a corrupt one." "She's right," Emily said, not unkindly. "But you're going to prison, not dying. You'll have time to earn back some honor. Maybe not all, but some." "How?" "Tell the complete truth at Victor's trial. Not the minimum for your plea deal, everything. Every person who was involved, every crime you witnessed, every corruption you enabled. Give them all the tools to stop this from happening again." Webb nodded slowly. "The FBI says you'll have to testify, too, at the trial." "I know." "Aren't you scared?" Emily smiled sadly. "I've been scared since I said those 4 words in the penthouse. But fear and duty aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're partners." After Webb left, Grace held her daughter tightly. "You didn't have to be kind to him." "Grandpa would have been," Emily replied. "He always said enemies were just people who hadn't found the right way to be friends yet." The trial began on a morning when Chicago couldn't decide between winter and spring, wind carrying both warmth and ice. The courthouse steps were packed with media from around the world. The Blackwell fraud case had become symbolic of larger issues: corporate corruption, wealth, inequality, the power of truth against money. Emily sat in the witness waiting room, her hands steady despite the earthquake in her chest. She wore her best dress, still simple but clean and pressed. Grace sat beside her and Tanaka stood by the window, having refused to let them face this alone. "Whatever happens," Tanaka said, "you've already won. You spoke truth when it mattered. Everything else is just aftermath." A bailiff appeared. "Emily Carter, they're ready for you." The walk to the courtroom felt both endless and instant. The doors opened to reveal a packed gallery. Victor Blackwell sat at the defense table, his appearance immaculate, but his eyes hollow with rage. Preston and Eleanor were in the front row, their faces masks of disdain. As Emily took the stand, she saw others too. Catherine Chen, notebook ready. David Kim, offering an encouraging nod. Marcus Thompson and his uncle representing all the workers who'd found new hope. And in the back, barely visible, Marcus Webb come to witness the consequences of his choices. The prosecutor, Janet Rodriguez, approached with a warm smile. "Emily, I know this is intimidating, but I just need you to tell the truth about what happened that day in the penthouse. Can you do that?" Emily looked at Victor Blackwell, the man who'd tried to destroy her family. She looked at Preston and Eleanor, who'd made it personal. She looked at all the powerful people who'd assumed a maid's daughter couldn't possibly matter. Then she thought of her grandfather, who'd faced real bullets and never flinched from duty. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "I can tell the truth. I've been telling it all along." The prosecutor began with simple questions, establishing the scene. Then came the crucial moment. "What exactly did you hear that made you speak up?" Emily detailed the discrepancies between the English contract and Webb's translation, her recall perfect, her delivery clear. The courtroom was silent, except for her voice and the court reporter's keys. "And you're certain about these differences?" Rodriguez asked. "Completely certain. Languages were my grandfather's gift to me. I would never dishonor that gift by being careless with them." The cross-examination came from Sterling, the same lawyer who'd conducted her deposition. He approached like a predator, all false concern and hidden teeth. "Miss Carter, you've become quite famous from this incident, haven't you?" "I never wanted fame." "But you have it. Magazine covers scholarship offers a powerful patron in Mr. Tanaka. Some might say you've profited handsomely from destroying a great American company." Emily felt the trap, but walked into it anyway, trusting truth over tactics. "I didn't destroy anything. I prevented a theft. If Blackwell Global collapsed, it's because it was built on fraud. That's like blaming a building inspector for a structure falling down when they point out the rotten foundations." Sterling tried another approach. "You claim you acted purely from conscience. But isn't it true that your grandfather had a grudge against successful businessmen, that he poisoned you against people like Mr. Blackwell? My grandfather taught me to judge people by their actions, not their bank accounts. He respected honest success and despised corruption. If that's poison, then yes, I'm poisoned with integrity." A ripple of appreciation went through the gallery. Sterling's face reddened. "You're very articulate for a 12-year-old. Almost like you've been coached." "I read a lot. Books are free at the library. Education doesn't require wealth, just effort." Sterling made several more attempts to discredit her, but each question only highlighted the simple fact that she'd told the truth and Victor had lied. When he finally gave up, Emily could see defeat in his shoulders. But the most dramatic moment came when Webb testified. True to his promise to Emily, he held nothing back. He detailed every bribe, every falsified document, every meeting where Victor had explicitly instructed him to deceive Tanaka. He produced emails, recordings, documents, a treasure trove of evidence he'd kept as insurance. "Why did you keep all this?" the prosecutor asked. Webb looked directly at Emily as he answered. "Because some part of me knew that someday someone would have the courage I lacked. Someone would stand up and say, 'That's not what it says.' I kept it for them." Victor's defense crumbled entirely. His own lawyers seemed to deflate as evidence mounted. By the time closing arguments came, conviction seemed inevitable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Victor Blackwell would spend the next 20 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, Preston cursing, Eleanor fainting dramatically. But Emily heard none of it. She was looking at a man in the gallery she hadn't noticed before, an elderly Asian, wearing a veteran's pin. He nodded to her once respectfully, then disappeared into the crowd. Later, she would learn he was one of the soldiers her grandfather had saved alongside James Tanaka, come to witness Walter Carter's legacy of honor triumph once more. Outside the courthouse in the spring sunshine that had finally decided to stay warm, Tanaka stood with Grace and Emily. The media clamored for statements, but Emily had said everything necessary. "What now?" Grace asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "Now we live," Tanaka said simply. "With honor, with purpose, with the knowledge that truth can still defeat power." Emily looked up at the Chicago skyline. The Blackwell Tower still stood, but it would soon bear a new name. Tanaka had bought it during the bankruptcy proceedings, planning to turn it into mixed-income housing and community spaces. Where Victor had built a monument to greed, something better would grow. "Grandpa would be proud," Emily said softly. "No," Grace corrected, pulling her daughter close. "Grandpa is proud. Wherever he is, he's proud." As they walked away from the courthouse, Emily felt the weight she'd carried since that day in the penthouse finally lifting. She was still 12 years old, still had school tomorrow, still lived in a small apartment with her mother. But she had proven something important, not just to the world, but to herself. Honor wasn't inherited. It was chosen one decision at a time, one truth at a time. And she would keep choosing it, keep speaking it for as long as she had voice to speak. Behind them, the courthouse steps emptied, the cameras packed away, the story seemingly ended. But Emily knew better. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The beginning of a life lived by Walter Carter's principles of truth, spoken to power, of honor, echoing across generations. The beginning of everything that mattered. The guilty verdict against Victor Blackwell should have been the end. But Emily had learned that powerful men rarely accepted defeat gracefully. The morning after the trial, she woke to find their apartment building surrounded not by media this time, but by protesters. Preston had mobilized his remaining supporters, painting his family as victims of a corrupt justice system. "Blackwell gave us jobs," someone shouted through a megaphone. "Now we have nothing." Grace peered through the curtains, her face pale. "How do we get to school, to work?" Before Emily could answer, her phone rang. It was Tanaka. "Don't leave through the front. I've sent a car to the back alley. Sarah will escort you." Sarah, the cybersecurity expert who'd become their unofficial bodyguard, met them at the rear exit. As they drove through Chicago's streets, Emily watched the protesters grow smaller in the distance, but their anger lingered like smoke. "They blame us," Emily said quietly. "They blame you because it's easier than blaming themselves for believing lies." Sarah replied, her Israeli accent giving her words a sharp edge. "I've seen this before in my country. When truth threatens comfortable lies, people attack the truth teller, not the liar." At school, Emily found her locker vandalized with spray paint, snitch. The word stung more than she expected. She'd told herself she was prepared for backlash, but the reality of being marked, labeled, othered it wore at her resolve. "Ignore them," her friend Maria said, helping clean the locker. Maria's father had been one of the accountants who'd come forward after Emily's testimony, finally free to speak about the fraud he'd witnessed. "They're just angry because their world is changing." "Maybe change isn't always good," Emily replied, surprising herself with the doubt in her voice. That afternoon, in her advanced economics class, a placement Tanaka's scholarship had made possible, the teacher, Mr. Brennan, posed a question that felt targeted. "Miss Carter, since you're our resident expert on corporate ethics, perhaps you can explain to the class whether destroying a company that employed thousands is morally justifiable, even if that company was corrupt." The classroom fell silent, 20 pairs of eyes turning to her. Emily felt the weight of the question, its implicit accusation. "I didn't destroy Blackwell Global," she said carefully. "I exposed a crime. If a doctor diagnoses cancer, we don't blame them for the disease. We thank them for finding it before it spreads." "But chemotherapy can kill the patient," Mr. Brennan countered. "Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease." "And sometimes," Emily replied, finding her strength, "letting the cancer grow kills everything around it. How many other companies would Victor Blackwell have destroyed if he'd succeeded? How many more families would he have cheated?" A student in the back, Thomas Chen, whose parents owned a small import business, spoke up. "My dad says Blackwell tried to force them out of business 3 years ago. Used legal threats they couldn't afford to fight. We almost lost everything." Other students began sharing similar stories, parents driven to bankruptcy, small businesses crushed, innovations stolen. The narrative Preston had been pushing of Blackwell as benevolent job creator crumbled under the weight of lived experience. After class, Mr. Brennan approached Emily. "I apologize for putting you on the spot. The board has been pressuring teachers to present both sides of the Blackwell situation. Some major donors are friends of the family." "So even here in school, their money talks?" Emily asked. "Money always talks," Mr. Brennan said sadly. "The question is whether we choose to listen." That evening, Emily arrived home to find her mother in tears, holding an official-looking letter. "We're being sued," Grace said, her voice hollow. "Eleanor Blackwell is suing us for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of consortium." "Loss of what?" Emily asked. Sarah, who'd been reviewing security footage on her laptop, looked up grimly. "It means she's claiming you destroyed her marriage. It's a vindictive lawsuit meant to drain your resources and energy." Tanaka, who'd been in Tokyo, joined them via video call. "Don't worry about the legal fees. My lawyers will handle this. But Eleanor knows that. This isn't about winning, it's about harassment." "Then why don't we sue her back?" Emily asked, frustration building. "Because that's what they want," Tanaka explained. "To drag you into an endless cycle of litigation, to make you as vindictive as them. Your power comes from being better than they are. Don't let them pull you down to their level." But being better was exhausting. Over the next weeks, the harassment intensified. Their mail was tampered with. Grace's car was vandalized repeatedly. Emily received death threats online that, while probably not serious, were serious enough for the FBI to investigate. One particularly bad evening, after finding their apartment door covered in graffiti, Emily broke down. "I wish I'd never said anything," she sobbed to her mother. "I wish I'd just stayed quiet." Grace held her daughter tightly. Do you really wish Mr. Tanaka had lost everything, that Victor's theft had succeeded?" "No," Emily admitted through tears. "But I wish doing the right thing didn't hurt so much." That's the price of honor in a dishonorable world, Grace said. Your grandfather paid it every day of his life. The question is whether we think it's worth paying. The answer came unexpectedly the next day. Emily arrived at school to find not vandalism, but flowers at her locker. Dozens of bouquets with cards from around the world. A teacher from Japan whose pension fund had been protected from a Blackwell takeover. A small business owner from Germany who'd been warned away from a fraudulent deal by the publicity. A retired soldier from Texas who'd served with Walter Carter and wanted his granddaughter to know she was carrying on his legacy. You see, Maria said, helping Emily read the cards, for every person who hates you for telling the truth, there are 10 who need you to keep telling it. That afternoon, Catherine Chen from the Tribune called with news. Preston's alderman campaign is collapsing. His financial disclosures revealed he'd been taking money from some very questionable sources, Russian oligarchs, Saudi princes with human rights violations. The FBI is investigating. So he's going down like his father? Emily asked. Corruption is hereditary in the Blackwell family, apparently, Chen replied. But that's not why I called. I'm working on a follow-up story about the positive changes since Blackwell's fall. Would you be willing to talk about what you've learned? Emily agreed, but this interview felt different from the others. She was no longer just telling her story. She was analyzing it, understanding it as part of something larger. Power protects power, she told Chen. The Blackwells had been corrupt for years, and everyone knew it. But as long as they were successful, nobody cared. It took someone with nothing to lose, or rather someone who valued honor more than safety, to break that protection. And now, Chen asked, what happens to that power? It doesn't disappear, it shifts. The question is whether it shifts to better people or just different ones. That question was answered partially when Tanaka announced his plans for the former Blackwell Tower. The top floors would remain offices, but for nonprofits and social enterprises. The middle floors would become affordable housing. The ground floors would host community services, a health clinic, a legal aid office, a branch library. We're calling it the Carter Commons, Tanaka announced at the press conference. After Staff Sergeant Walter Carter, whose legacy of service inspired its mission. Emily stood at the podium beside him, no longer the scared 12-year-old from the penthouse, but not yet the woman she would become. In between, in the difficult space of transformation. My grandfather believed in bridges, not walls, she said to the assembled crowd. This building was a wall separating the powerful from everyone else. Now it will be a bridge connecting communities, services, and hope. Preston, out on bail while under investigation, appeared on a podcast that night, his rage barely contained. They're erasing my family's legacy. Everything my father built destroyed by a child who doesn't understand the first thing about business. But his words rang hollow now. The FBI had frozen his assets after discovering offshore accounts linked to money laundering. Eleanor had fled to Switzerland, abandoning both husband and son. The Blackwell Empire hadn't just fallen, it had revealed itself to be built entirely on crime. Marcus Webb, serving his sentence in minimum security prison, sent Emily a letter that arrived the next week. I'm teaching English to other inmates, many of them immigrants. It's the first honest work I've done in years. It pays nothing and means everything. You were right, honor isn't something you have, it's something you do. I'm doing it now, one small act at a time. Thank you for showing me it was still possible. Emily kept the letter, adding it to a growing collection of correspondence from people whose lives had been touched by her moment of truth. Each letter was a reminder that individual actions could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. But the most significant development came when the Department of Justice announced a new task force focused on corporate fraud, inspired by the Blackwell case. They wanted Emily to speak at their inaugural conference, sharing her perspective on why whistleblowers, especially young ones, needed protection and encouragement. "I'm 13, Emily pointed out to the official who called. "I haven't even finished middle school." "Which is exactly why we need you," the official replied. "You see things differently. You haven't been taught to accept corruption as business as usual." The conference was held in Washington, D.C., in a hotel so fancy Emily felt like she was trespassing, just walking through the lobby. She sat on a panel with FBI agents, prosecutors, and corporate compliance officers, her school uniform standing out among the suits. "Miss Carter," the moderator began, "what would you say to other young people who witness wrongdoing but are afraid to speak up?" Emily thought of her grandfather, of his quiet courage, of the price he'd paid for honor, and the legacy he'd left. "Fear is rational," she said. "Speaking up against power is dangerous. You might lose your job, your friends, your safety. But silence is dangerous too. It's dangerous to your soul, to your self-respect, to the person you want to be. The question isn't whether to be afraid, it's what you're more afraid of, the consequences of speaking or the consequences of staying silent." An FBI agent on the panel asked, "Do you regret exposing the Blackwells?" "I regret that it was necessary," Emily replied. "I regret that so many people knew about the corruption and said nothing. I regret that it took a 12-year-old girl to stop a crime that adults had been enabling for years. But I don't regret speaking the truth." After the panel, a young woman approached Emily, an intern at a major bank who'd discovered her supervisors were opening fake accounts to meet quotas. "I've been documenting everything," she whispered, "but I'm terrified. I have student loans, rent. I can't afford to lose this job." Emily gave her Sarah's contact information. "There are people who can help protect you. But more importantly, ask yourself, can you afford to keep this job if it means betraying everything you believe in?" 2 weeks later, the news broke about massive fraud at that bank. The young woman had come forward, protected by whistleblower laws and supported by advocacy groups. Another domino fell in the long chain Emily had started. Back in Chicago, life found a new rhythm. Emily excelled in school, her confidence growing with each challenge faced. Grace had been promoted at Tanaka Industries, her intelligence and work ethic finally recognized and rewarded. They'd moved to a better apartment, nothing fancy, but safe, clean, with windows that actually sealed and heating that always worked. One evening, as spring turned toward summer, Emily sat with Tanaka in the newly renovated Carter Commons. The transformation was remarkable. Where once there had been sterile marble and aggressive architecture, now there was warmth, accessibility, community. "Your grandfather would be amazed," Tanaka said, watching children play in the building's new daycare center through glass walls. "He would wonder why it took so long," Emily replied. "He always said the measure of a civilization was how it treated its most vulnerable members." "Speaking of which," Tanaka said, pulling out an envelope, "this came for you through my office." The return address was the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Inside was a handwritten letter from Victor Blackwell. Emily's hands trembled as she read, "Miss Carter, I write this from a cell that costs the taxpayers less per day than I used to spend on lunch. The irony is not lost on me. I hated you with a passion that kept me awake at night, planning elaborate revenges I would never be able to execute. A child had destroyed everything I'd built over 40 years. The humiliation was unbearable. But hatred, I've learned, is exhausting when you have nothing but time. So I've been thinking instead. Thinking about the moment you spoke up. Thinking about what kind of courage that took. Thinking about what kind of man raises a granddaughter with such integrity. I know about Walter Carter now. I researched him from prison, his service record, his life, his death with nothing but honor to his name. I spent my life accumulating wealth and power. He spent his accumulating respect and love. We both died him physically, me professionally, but his legacy lives on through you. While mine rots with me in this cell, I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and you shouldn't give it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. You didn't destroy me. You revealed me. You showed the world what I really was beneath the success and suits, and perhaps in doing so you saved me from becoming something even worse. 20 years is a long time. I intend to use it to figure out who Victor Blackwell might have been if he'd had a Walter Carter in his life. If he'd learned that honor matters more than profit. If he'd chosen bridges over walls. Don't respond to this letter. You owe me nothing. But know that even here in the darkness I created for myself, your truth lit something. Not redemption, it's too late for that. But maybe understanding. Maybe that's enough. Victor Blackwell. Emily read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Tanaka. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. Do you believe him? Tanaka asked. Does it matter? Emily replied. He's right that I owe him nothing. But if he truly understands what he did wrong, maybe someone else reading about it won't make the same mistakes. She folded the letter carefully and put it in her bag, another document in the strange archive of her young life. Tomorrow, there would be school homework, normal 13-year-old concerns. But tonight, in this building that had transformed from monument to greed into beacon of hope, she felt the weight of her grandfather's legacy settling comfortably on her shoulders. Mr. Tanaka, she said suddenly, I want to learn more about your father, about the man my grandfather saved. Tanaka smiled. He would have liked you very much. He often said that Walter Carter saved his life, but more importantly, showed him how to live it with purpose. He stood looking out at Chicago's skyline. Next month I'm returning to Tokyo for the anniversary of my father's death. Would you and your mother like to come to see the Walter Works, to meet the families whose lives exist because of your grandfather's courage? Emily nodded, tears threatening but not falling. Another bridge to cross, another connection to make. As they prepared to leave, Emily noticed a small plaque by the entrance she hadn't seen before. It bore Walter's picture and a simple inscription, "Honor is not inherited, it is chosen. Choose wisely." Below it, in smaller text, dedicated to all who speak truth to power, whatever the cost. People passed the plaque, most not stopping to read it. But some did. Some paused, read thought. Maybe one of them would face their own moment of truth tomorrow, next week, next year. Maybe they would remember that a 12-year-old girl had chosen honor over safety and changed everything. The sun set over Chicago, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. Emily and Tanaka walked through the commons, past the daycare, where parents picked up children, past the legal aid office where lawyers worked pro bono for those who couldn't afford justice, past the clinic, where doctors treated patients regardless of insurance. Was it worth it? Tanaka asked as they reached the exit. All the pain, the fear, the loss. Emily thought about the question seriously, as she'd learned to think about all important questions. She thought about the nights her mother had cried from stress, about the friends she'd lost, about the innocence stolen by death threats and lawsuits. Then she thought about the workers who'd kept their pensions, about Tanaka, keeping his company, about this building, serving communities instead of crushing them. Ask me in 10 years, she finally said, when I can see more of the ripples. Tanaka laughed, a warm sound that reminded Emily that joy could exist alongside struggle. A very mature answer for a 13-year-old. I had a good teacher, Emily replied, touching the pocket where she kept one of Walter's old letters, a talisman against doubt. They parted ways at the building entrance. Tanaka to his hotel, Emily to catch the bus home with her mother. As she waited at the stop, she noticed a man watching her from across the street. For a moment, fear spiked another angry Blackwell supporter. But then he stepped into the light, and she saw his face clearly. It was one of the security guards from the Blackwell Tower, the one who'd always smiled at her mother, who'd sometimes snuck Emily cookies from the executive break room. He crossed the street slowly, cautiously. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I wanted to thank you. What you did, it gave me permission to finally tell my wife about what I'd seen over the years. The bribes, the threats, the people destroyed for profit. I'd kept it all inside, thinking I was protecting my family by staying silent. But the silence was poisoning me." He pulled out a worn photo of 2 children. "My grandkids. I want them to grow up knowing their grandfather chose truth when it mattered. You taught me that was still possible." Before Emily could respond, he walked away, disappearing into Chicago's evening crowd. Another ripple, another life changed, another validation that honor could echo across more than just generations. It could echo across consciences, awakening courage people didn't know they had. The bus arrived, crowded with tired workers heading home. Emily found a seat next to an elderly woman reading a Polish newspaper. On the front page was a photo from the Carter Commons opening. The woman noticed Emily looking. "You are the girl," she said in accented English. "The one who spoke truth." Emily nodded, bracing for either praise or condemnation, but the woman simply patted her hand. "Good," she said. "My grandmother in Poland, she also spoke truth to power. The Nazis killed her for it. But first she saved 12 Jewish children. Truth speakers, we remember them. Liars, they fade like smoke." As the bus rumbled through Chicago's streets, Emily thought about that, about remembrance and legacy, about the long arc of justice that bent slowly but inevitably toward truth. She was 13 years old, with decades ahead to see where the ripples led. But already she could see the pattern forming, the web of connections that started with one moment of choosing honor over fear. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Picking up dinner, Chinese or pizza? Such a normal question after such an extraordinary journey. Emily smiled, texting back, "Chinese, and Mom, I love you." "Love you too, baby. Always." Always. The word resonated as the bus carried her home. The Blackwells had thought their empire would last always, but they'd built on lies, and lies were temporary. Truth, honor, love, these were the things that lasted always. The flight to Tokyo marked Emily's first time leaving the United States, her first time on an airplane at all. She pressed her face to the window as Chicago disappeared beneath clouds, the city that had been her whole world suddenly small and distant. Beside her, Grace dozed, fitfully exhausted from weeks of preparation and anxiety about leaving everything familiar behind, even temporarily. Tanaka sat across the aisle reviewing documents, but occasionally glancing over with a gentle smile. He'd arranged everything, passports, tickets, accommodations, with the same quiet efficiency that characterized all his kindnesses. Emily had tried to thank him, but he'd waved her off. "Debts of honor don't diminish with payment," he'd said. "They grow with gratitude." The 14-hour flight gave Emily time to study the Japanese language materials Tanaka had provided, advanced texts that built on Walter's foundation. She found notes in the margins of one book, written in her grandfather's careful hand. "Language is the soul of a people. Learn the words, but more importantly, learn the silence between them." When they landed at Narita Airport, the humidity hit like a wall, but Emily barely noticed, transfixed by the seamless blend of efficiency and courtesy that characterized every interaction. Immigration officers who bowed slightly as they stamped passports. Elderly volunteers helping confused tourists with genuine smiles. It was a different kind of power than Chicago's aggressive ambition power, through service strength, through gentleness. The drive to their hotel revealed Tokyo in layers hyper-modern skyscrapers next to tiny shrines businessmen, in identical suits, waiting patiently, beside teenagers in fantastic costumes. Emily tried to absorb everything, feeling Walter's presence in her excitement. He'd never made it back to Japan after the war, but he'd carried it with him always. "Tomorrow we visit the Walter Works," Tanaka said, as they checked in. "Tonight rest, adjust, feel the city." But Emily couldn't rest. She stood at her window watching Tokyo pulse with neon life, thinking about the strange journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago she'd been invisible, a maid's daughter trying not to be noticed. Now she was in Japan as an honored guest, carrying her grandfather's legacy across an ocean he'd crossed in war, and she crossed in peace. Grace knocked, entering with tea she'd figured out how to make in the room's electronic kettle. "Can't sleep either. Everything's different here," Emily said. "But also familiar, like I'm remembering something I never knew." "That's Walter," Grace said softly. "He's in your bones, baby. This country shaped him, and he shaped you." The next morning came early and bright. Tanaka met them in the lobby, dressed more casually than Emily had ever seen him. His usual armor of expensive suits replaced by simple slacks and a polo shirt. "Today isn't about business," he explained. "It's about family." The Walter Works stood 40 minutes outside Tokyo, in an industrial district that managed to be both functional and somehow beautiful. The building itself was unremarkable, clean lines, efficient design, but the entrance told a different story. A garden meticulously maintained led to doors beneath a sign in Japanese and English, "Walter Works, where honor builds future." Inside the lobby stood a display case Emily hadn't expected. Behind glass were Walter's dog tags donated by Tanaka's father decades ago after Walter had sent them as a gift. Beside them, a photo of Walter carrying James Tanaka to safety, the original worn and faded but carefully preserved, and below a plaque with words in both languages. "Staff Sergeant Walter Carter gave us 40 years we shouldn't have had. Every life improved by our work exists because he chose to see enemy as friend foreign, as familiar, different as human. We build to honor his memory. We work to deserve his sacrifice." Emily touched the glass, gently, tears flowing freely. Behind her, she heard Grace sob quietly. 3,000 people work here, Tanaka said. Each one knows this story. Each one knows that their job exists because an American soldier refused to let my father die. A crowd had gathered, workers on break, administrators, engineers. They stood silently, respectfully, watching the granddaughter of their company's savior see her grandfather's legacy made manifest. An elderly man stepped forward, bowing deeply. When he straightened, Emily saw tears on his weathered face. He spoke in careful English. "I am Yamamoto. I work here 43 years. My children have education because this job. My grandchildren have future because this job. Your grandfather gave us all life. Thank you for bringing him home." Others came forward, each with a story. A woman whose medical device invention had been nurtured here. A young engineer whose scholarship from the company had lifted him from poverty. A secretary whose daughter's leukemia treatment had been covered by the company's exceptional insurance. Each story a ripple from Walter's original act of courage. "We would like to show you the production floor," Tanaka said, "if you're willing." They walked through clean, bright spaces where workers assembled components for MRI machines, surgical instruments, diagnostic equipment. At each station, work stopped as employees stood and bowed. Emily didn't know how to respond, except to bow back deeply respectfully, acknowledging their acknowledgement. In the cafeteria, they'd prepared a feast. Traditional Japanese dishes alongside American favorites. An edible bridge between cultures. Emily sat between elderly workers who'd known James Tanaka and young employees who only knew the legend. They peppered her with questions about Walter, about Chicago, about her own story of confronting the Blackwells. "You have his courage," one young woman said in perfect English. "Different war, same spirit." After lunch, Tanaka led them to a conference room where several men and women in suits waited. "These are journalists," he explained. "From NHK, Asahi Shimbun, others. They'd like to interview you if you're willing. The Blackwell story was big news here, Japanese business saved by American honor. People want to understand." Emily looked at her mother, who nodded encouragement. She'd learned that telling truth meant telling it repeatedly in different forms to different audiences, each telling strengthening the foundation of change. The interview was conducted through a translator, though Emily understood most of the Japanese and occasionally answered directly, causing delighted surprise. They asked about Walter, about the penthouse moment, about courage and consequence. "Your grandfather fought in a war against Japan," one journalist noted. "Yet he saved Japanese-American soldiers. You exposed American corruption to save a Japanese company. Do you see a pattern?" Emily thought carefully. "My grandfather didn't see nationality when he saw someone who needed help. He saw humanity. I didn't think about Mr. Tanaka being Japanese when I heard the lies. I thought about him being cheated. Honor doesn't have a flag." The phrase resonated. Within hours, it would be trending on Japanese social media. Honor doesn't have a flag. It captured something essential about both Walter's generation and Emily's, the possibility of principles transcending borders. That evening, Tanaka took them to his family home, a traditional house somehow preserved amid Tokyo's relentless modernization. His wife Michiko greeted them with warmth that needed no translation. The house was modest compared to Tanaka's wealth, but rich with history. "My father built this after the war," Tanaka explained, leading them to a room that was clearly a shrine of sorts. With his first profits from the company that became Tanaka Industries. "He never moved even when we could afford palaces. Said this house was built on gratitude and shouldn't be abandoned for luxury." The room contained photos, documents, artifacts from James Tanaka's life. Central was a framed letter from Walter dated 1952. "James, I got your letter about starting the business. I'm proud of you, friend. You're building something from nothing, creating instead of destroying. That's the real victory over war. You keep thanking me for saving your life, but you've got it backward. Every day in Korea, I had to choose between being the man I wanted to be or the man war wanted to make me. Saving you saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. Build your company. Raise your children. Live with honor. That's the only thanks I need. Your friend always, Walter." Emily read it twice, hearing her grandfather's voice in every word. This was the Walter she'd known, uncomfortable with praise, insistent that doing right was its own reward. "There's something else," Tanaka said, leading them to a modern addition to the house. "My father started this. I've continued it." The room was lined with filing cabinets, each meticulously labeled. Inside were records, thousands of them. Every person the Walter Works had employed. Every student they'd given scholarships. Every patient whose life had been saved by their medical devices. Names, photos, stories. "We call it the Ripple Archive," Tanaka explained. "Documenting how one act of kindness spreads outward, touching lives Walter never knew existed." Emily pulled out a file at random. A young woman from Osaka, scholarship recipient, now a doctor serving rural communities. Another file, a factory worker whose son became an engineer, whose daughter became a teacher. Another, a patient, whose life was saved by a Walter Works cardiac device, who went on to start an orphanage. "How many?" Emily asked, overwhelmed by the scale. Directly hundreds of thousands. Indirectly impossible to count. Your grandfather saved one man. That man built something that saved multitudes. They spent hours in that room reading stories, seeing faces, understanding that honor's echo didn't diminish with distance. It amplified each good act, spawning others in endless multiplication. As the evening deepened, Michiko served dinner simple, elegant, perfect. They ate in comfortable silence, the weight of legacy settling gently around them. After dinner, Tanaka's adult children arrived with their own families. The grandchildren, ranging from Emily's age to tiny toddlers, stared at her with curious eyes. The eldest, a boy named Hiroshi, worked up courage to speak in careful English. "You're the girl who stopped the bad man." "I'm the girl who told the truth," Emily corrected gently. "Same thing," Hiroshi said with the certainty of youth. Tanaka's daughter Yuki, a lawyer specializing in corporate compliance, pulled Emily aside. "What you did has changed things here too. Japanese companies are strengthening their whistleblower protections inspired by your example. We're calling it the Emily effect." "That's strange," Emily said, uncomfortable with the attribution. "No stranger than a 12-year-old bringing down a billionaire," Yuki replied. "Strange times require strange heroes." The next days passed in a blur of experiences. They visited temples where Tanaka's father had prayed for Walter's spirit. They met with business leaders who wanted to understand how to build ethical cultures that would prevent Blackwell-style corruption. They attended a conference where Emily spoke to Japanese students about the importance of speaking up against wrongdoing. "In Japan, we have a saying," one student said during the Q&A, "the nail that sticks up gets hammered down." How do you find courage to stick up anyway? Emily thought of Walter, of his quiet refusal to be hammered into shapes that betrayed his principles. Maybe the problem isn't the nail that sticks up. Maybe it's the hammer that thinks everything should be flat. Be the nail that breaks the hammer. The response was electric. Within days, break. The hammer would become a rallying cry for young Japanese activists pushing for corporate reform. On their last night in Tokyo, Tanaka arranged something special. They attended a traditional tea ceremony, but with a twist. The tea master was the son of one of the soldiers Walter had saved alongside James Tanaka. "My father lived to 93, he said, as he prepared the tea with practiced precision. He had 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, all because your grandfather saw him as worth saving." The ceremony proceeded in contemplative silence, each movement deliberate, meaningful. Emily understood this was communication beyond words, gratitude too deep for language connection, transcending time. As they prepared to leave Japan, standing in Narita Airport's departure lounge, Tanaka handed Emily a package. Inside was a piece of calligraphy, beautiful characters flowing like water. "Honor is the bridge between past and future. You are the bridge. Walk with certainty." "It's from the employees at the Walter Works," Tanaka explained. "They wanted you to have something to remember them by." "As if I could forget," Emily said, clutching the calligraphy carefully. The flight home felt different. Emily was returning changed, carrying new weight, but also new strength. She'd seen her grandfather's legacy made tangible, understood that individual actions could reshape entire worlds. Grace, reading the in-flight magazine, suddenly gasped. "Emily, look at this." She pointed to an article about Preston Blackwell's arrest on federal corruption charges. He'd been caught trying to bribe a judge to reduce his father's sentence. The photo showed him being led away in handcuffs, his golden boy facade finally cracked beyond repair. "It's over," Grace said with relief. "No," Emily replied thoughtfully. "The Blackwells are over. But what they represent, greed, corruption, the belief that money matters more than honor, that's not over. That's a forever fight. That's a heavy thought for a 13-year-old. Good thing I won't be 13 forever. They landed in Chicago on a humid July morning, the city sprawling beneath them like a promise and a challenge combined. At customs, the officer looked at their passports, then at Emily with recognition. "You're the Carter girl," he said. "The one who took down Blackwell." Emily nodded, braced for judgment. The officer stamped their passports with unnecessary force, a smile playing at his lips. "My sister worked at Blackwell, accounting. She knew about the fraud, but was too scared to speak up. After you did what you did, she finally came forward, helped the FBI build their case. She sleeps better now. So do I." Another ripple, Emily thought. Another life changed by truth-telling's permission. The ride home from O'Hare took them through Chicago's contradictions, gleaming towers and crumbling projects, pristine parks and polluted rivers, hope and despair sharing the same streets. The Carter Commons stood tall among it all, its transformed purpose visible even from the highway. Their apartment felt smaller after Tokyo's expansiveness, but also more precious. This was theirs, earned honestly, maintained with dignity. Emily unpacked carefully, placing the calligraphy on her wall beside her grandfather's photo. That evening, as they shared Chinese takeout that tasted like coming home, Emily's phone rang. It was David Kim Tanaka's lawyer. "Emily, I wanted you to know Eleanor Blackwell's lawsuit has been dismissed. The judge called it frivolous and vindictive. She's been ordered to pay your legal fees." "Will she?" Emily asked. "Probably not. She's fled to Switzerland permanently. But the dismissal is public record. Another piece of the Blackwell mythology crumbling." After dinner, Emily sat at her desk, surrounded by homework and textbooks, but her mind wandered to larger things. She pulled out a notebook and began writing, not an assignment, but a mission statement, something to guide her through the years ahead. "I am Emily Carter, granddaughter of Walter, daughter of Grace, heir to honor. I didn't earn but must deserve. I've seen how one truth can topple empires, how one act of courage can echo across generations. I've learned that power isn't about having money or position. It's about having the strength to say, 'That's not what it says,' when everyone wants you to stay silent. I'm 13 years old. I have decades ahead to fight the forever fight against corruption, greed, the small compromises that lead to large collapses. I'll study law to understand the weapons of words. I'll study business to recognize the patterns of deception. I'll study history to remember that this fight has been fought before and will be fought again. But mostly, I'll remember the Walter Works, where 3,000 people build medical devices that save lives, all because one man refused to let another man die. I'll remember the Ripple Archive documenting how goodness multiplies when given the chance. I'll remember that honor doesn't have a flag, that truth doesn't have a price, that courage doesn't have an age limit. The Blackwells thought they were powerful because they could buy anything. But they couldn't buy silence from a 12-year-old girl who'd been taught that some things aren't for sale. They couldn't buy honor they'd never earned. They couldn't buy their way out of consequences that Chum from Truth finally told. Preston is in jail. Eleanor is in exile. Victor is in prison. The tower that bore their name now carries my grandfather's. That's not revenge, it's justice. It's the universe's way of saying that honor outlasts greed, that truth outlives lies, that bridges beat walls every time. Tomorrow I go back to school. I'll sit in classes with kids who have no idea what I've seen, what I've done, what I carry. Some will treat me as a hero, others as a freak. Neither matters. What matters is that I keep choosing honor, keep speaking truth, keep being the bridge between what is and what should be. Grandpa said courage was hereditary, but you had to choose to inherit it. I choose. Every day I choose. When it's hard, when it's dangerous, when it's lonely, I choose. Because somewhere in Tokyo, a tea master's grandchildren exist, because Walter Carter chose. Somewhere in Chicago, a security guard sleeps peacefully, because Emily Carter chose. Somewhere tomorrow, someone will face their own moment of truth and remember that a 13-year-old girl chose honor over safety, truth over comfort, right over easy, and they'll choose too. The ripples continue. Emily set down her pen and looked out at Chicago's lights. Somewhere out there in a federal prison, Victor Blackwell was probably lying on a narrow bunk, thinking about everything he'd lost. Somewhere else in those same lights were thousands of people whose lives were better because his empire had fallen. She thought about the Polish woman on the bus who'd said truth speakers are remembered while liars fade like smoke. The Blackwell name would become a cautionary tale, a synonym for corruption. But the Carter name, her grandfather's name, her name would stand for something else. Not fame or fortune, but the simple, radical act of telling the truth when it mattered most. A text arrived from Maria. History homework done. Mr. Brennan is giving a quiz tomorrow. Emily smiled. Back to being 13, back to normal concerns. But she'd never really be normal again. She'd stood in the penthouse and changed the world with 4 words. She'd walked through the Walter Works and seen how honor compounds across time. She'd faced down the powerful and discovered they were hollow. Working on it, she texted back. Be done soon. She turned to her homework, the American Revolution. Another story of small people standing up to big power. Her essay prompt asked what students would have done if they'd lived in those times. Most would write about fighting for freedom. Emily wrote about the courage to speak truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies, about the revolutionaries who risked everything not for glory, but for the simple right to live with dignity. As midnight approached, Grace checked in, finding Emily still writing. School tomorrow, baby. You need sleep. Almost done, Mom. Just thinking about something Mr. Tanaka said, that debts of honor don't diminish with payment, they grow with gratitude. That's beautiful, but you still need sleep. Emily closed her notebook, kissed her mother goodnight, and prepared for bed. But before sleeping, she stood before her grandfather's photo one more time. We did it, Grandpa. We brought down the Blackwells. We saved Mr. Tanaka's company. We proved honor still matters. But I know it's not over. It's never over. There are always more Blackwells, always more lies, always more fights. But there are also always more chances to choose courage. And I'll keep choosing it. For you. For Mom. For everyone who needs someone to say, that's not what it says, when the powerful are lying. She touched the photo gently, then turned out the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, school friends, the ordinary extraordinariness of being 13. But she would face them differently now, carrying the weight of legacy and the strength of truth, knowing that every choice mattered, every word had power, every action could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict or contain. In the darkness, Chicago hummed its eternal song of ambition and struggle, dreams and schemes. And in one small apartment, a 13-year-old girl slept peacefully, her grandfather's honor standing guard over her dreams, her future stretching ahead like an unwritten page waiting for truth to fill it. The Blackwell Empire was ashes. The Carter legacy was just beginning.